Welcome back to The Courage to Speak with me, Leonie Mellinger, the podcast that asks, what does it take to have the courage to speak up and speak out in life? Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the incredibly talented actor Roger Allam. With a career spanning over 4 decades, Roger has captivated audiences on stage and screen, from his iconic roles in The Thick of It to Endeavour, and countless performances in the West End. He's won 2 Olivier Awards for Best Actor, the first for his 2001 role of Captain Terry Dennis in Privates on Parade at the Donmar Warehouse in London's West End, and the second for his 2010 portrayal of Falstaff in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 at the Globe Theatre. Also an Olivier Award for Best Supporting Actor for his performance as Henry Graves in the National Theatre's 1999 production of Money, and an Evening Standard Film Award for his comedic performance in Tamara Drew. Known for his commanding presence and rich, nuanced performances, Roger's work often explores themes of power, conviction, and personal truth. The politicians Roger has portrayed include Hitler, Willy Brandt, and Winston Churchill. In his autobiography, Time Bends, Arthur Miller writes of Roger, to play Adrian in the 1986 Royal Shakespeare Company production of The Archbishop's Ceiling, Roger Allam gave up the leading role as Javert in the monster hit Les Miserables because he thought my play more challenging for him at that moment of his career. Nor did he consider his decision a particularly courageous one. This is part of what a theatre culture means, and it is something few New York actors would have the sense of security even to dream of doing. Roger, welcome. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on my podcast.
Nice to be here.
I wanted to start at the beginning because it seems a very good place to start. So you were born, I believe, in Bromley by Bow in London.
Yeah.
Were you originally a proper Cockney Londoner?
Well, I suppose so. I don't know. It was in it still is in the heart of the East End, and my father was a vicar, and he got that church, All Hallows, Bromley by Bow, just after the war to oversee the rebuilding of it because it was bombed. So it was still, when I was born, you were still in a very much a post-war era, and round the corner was the bomb site, as we called it, where people used to play, and there was a house with an upstairs room where the mantelpiece and the fireplace was still just hanging off one wall there. So the sense of the war was all around. But my memory is of people being very cheerful, you know. But then maybe that's because they were all Christians, because my father was a vicar and they were just,
Yes, I was going to ask you, what was that like to have a father as a vicar? Was it all very religious at home? Was there prayers before meal times?
Yes, there were, yes. A short grace,
yes.
Before meals. But it didn't seem to me that it was very restrictive in any way. It seemed a very warm and lovely household, and the rectory was huge, but there was our family, which was 5 of us occupying the middle 2 floors. There was a curate on the top floor in a flat with 2 children and his wife, and then in the basement flat was another curate. So it was quite densely populated, I suppose.
And what about around the family dinner table? Were there discussions about religion?
Not then. Not that I remember then, because I was very young. But later, when we moved, yes, discussions about anything, really.
Yeah. And so what influence did your father have on you?
Well, it's interesting because, he came from a economically poor working class background. He was born in 1914, and in Fulham. And I remember the house where he was born because his mother and sister still lived there in Fulham. A small 3-bedroom terraced house with a small yard out the back and an outside loo, no bathroom, a tin bath hanging on the wall of the scullery, and stuff like that. But also there were kind of, when they were children, when my father was a child, there were at least 10 people living in that house, sometimes 12, a mixture of lodgers, other members of the family, the two brothers who slept kind of on put-you-up beds on the floor downstairs, the two sisters who slept in with their parents, with a curtain drawn across the middle of the room for modesty's sake, and an aunt and an uncle in the back room, and then a lodger in the... I mean, it was, and I remember moving into a house like that in Stoke Newington, just me and my partner, and I'd lived before that in a flat with quite large rooms, and when we moved into this little house, which had a proper garden, not just an outside yard, we thought, it's a bit cramped, isn't it? It's extraordinary, really, the way life has changed in like that.
And what was his accent? Because you speak obviously perfect RP. Well,
I speak kind of RP with a London drawl, I guess, an estuary drawl. Right. So it depends. I'm using my posh voice now because I'm being interviewed.
Oh, I see. Okay. So how did he talk then?
Well, I'm convinced, in fact, I'm pretty sure that both he and my mother had elocution lessons because he spoke very well. I mean, he didn't speak posh when he was in the pulpit, as I remember, but when he was on the phone, I've got a little recording of him doing something, and he sounded incredibly sort of BBC 30s or 40s or something. Hello dear, 1970, all that sort of stuff. So his voice varied a bit, I suppose, right. But I remember all that wider family. They had, to my memory, quite gentle voices. I don't know, my grandmother, his mother, was a servant in a big, and died at 102, in a big house, and she always said that her long life was due to eating well when she was a young woman,
But you were torn away from this happy family home and sent to what sounds like a really brutal boarding school. I mean, what was that like?
Well, to begin with, it was absolutely horrible. I mean, and they sent me to that school. The argument was that I was going to have to change schools at some point during secondary schooling because my father was going to have to change jobs. And when he had this church in the city, St Mary Woolnoth, some place came up, a governor's place, But if I took that place up, which meant you could take a slightly easier entrance exam, it would mean I had to leave primary school a year early. And although I was bright at primary school, I was no way bright enough to do that. And unfortunately, the house that I was in, that was brutal. Not all houses were the same in this school, Christ Hospital, which was a charity school, which you couldn't go to if your parents earned over quite a modest amount of money. So that school that house seemed very, very brutal, and particularly the boys, actually, or some of them. There was a kind of senior thing, you had to call, if you were a boy at the school and you were a bit older than me, I'd have to call you Mellinger Sir.
Oh my goodness.
Otherwise you could be beaten about the face, and I mean not literally, but there was kind of culturally, boys who were older than you, they could punish you for something.
Oh my God.
And the accepted way of doing that was hitting you over the head with a boot brush.
That must have
which
worked.
I witnessed, but it never happened to me. But that was that was lonely and scary because my family had been a warm and loving family, but for them it was an enormous opportunity. I mean, going to a good school like that. Both my sisters went to, one went to Greycoats, the other went to Putney High.
And what effect did that have on? What were you like at that time? Were you outgoing or inward?
It's difficult to know. I thought of being. I think I went there wanting to be outward, but it frightened me.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And so that was quite silencing. I have to say that over time, the whole atmosphere of the school changed a great deal. Although I never got over going there a year early, so I was kind of stupid from the get-go, really.
Oh.
And yes, I was in all bottom sets. I did miserably at O-levels and failed my A-levels and managed to scrape into university by retaking them, things like that.
But I believe it was whilst at Christ Hospital that you saw a house production of Pinter's A Birthday Party, and that was the thing that first sparked your interest in acting?
I did, yes. Yes, it was that was one of the very good things about the schools, that there was a fair amount of school productions, but also house productions of plays. This was done by another house, the birthday party. I guess I was maybe 13, something like that. And a boy about my age, 13, 14, played, I forget the character's name, but played the main woman in it. Terribly good.
Yeah.
In my memory, terribly, terribly good. But I was very struck by the play, the atmosphere of the play, and the sense of being in a place that was that had a threatening atmosphere and a sense of rules that were just baffling, or made no sense. So I was very, very struck by that.
And so when did you first actually act yourself? Was that at university? Or?
No, at school.
At school, you were in production?
Yes. What was I in? Oh, Guildenstern in Hamlet. So dreary. And then I did what? I did Edgar in King Lear, and then Sir Toby Belch in Twelfth Night in my last year there. And I found a book in the library called Great Acting, which was a series of interviews with that great generation,
Yes.
Olivier Gielgud, Richardson, all that lot. And there, in the front cover, there was lots of pictures of them, when as young men, in extraordinary kind of makeups and stuff, which they'd all done, There was one of Olivier as Sir Toby Belch with vast amounts of makeup on and a nose and stuff like that. So I copied that, I had a fat suit, I had a bald cap, I had a wig on top of the bald cap, I had a nose. Oh, I was in seventh heaven.
Did you find that releasing to find the acting as a way of communicating?
Yes, I really enjoyed it, and I think I've always found it quite relaxing being on stage. I mean, exciting, but relaxing because, you know what you're going to say, you know what you have to do.
Yes.
If there's a fight in it, it's been rehearsed, So in that sense, I suppose it's kind of safe.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And how did your parents react to the news that you wanted to become an actor, given that they sent you away to help better you?
Yeah. Well, I was going to do a choral scholarship to Cambridge, but I failed my A-levels, so I couldn't take it up. And after that, I became much more convinced about wanting to pursue the acting path. But I didn't know about drama schools. And if they did, they didn't want me to go to drama school. So I found the few universities then that did drama degree courses, and I got into Manchester. And I had a wonderful time there. But the singing was still a possibility.
Yes, because you're a very good singer, aren't you?
Well, I'd always sung in the choir at school as a treble, and then when my voice broke, it settled down a bit and I could still sing. So I had singing lessons, and for some weird way, I got singing lessons at English National Opera during the holidays when I was at university with their vocal consultant, John Hargreaves, a lovely man who was very encouraging and who charged me £2 an hour. So generous, I mean,
Super.
So that was always a possibility, going into classical singing. But as I was at university, I just became less and less interested in that. There weren't so many good touring opera productions that you could see then. Occasionally something good, but and also, the life of being a classical singer is simply devoting yourself to the production of that particular sound. And as a man, you wouldn't know until you were about 30 whether it was going to be much cop, really, you know.
So
And as a young actor, I mean, when I was at university, there were loads of small radical touring groups who toured to Manchester and came to the drama department and performed in the drama department studio. And so, you know, and there were small regional theatre companies that we were going to, the Liverpool Everyman, Contact Theatre in Manchester, the Stoke-on-Trent Theatre, Peter Cheeseman's theatre. And so it was just it made me very aware that there were lots of interesting things you could do as an actor between the age of 20 and 30 that you simply could not do as a singer. I just thought it was, you know, groovier as well.
Absolutely. But how on earth did you come to join the feminist theatre company Monstrous Regiment?
Well, I'd seen companies like that at university. And Time Out in those days had a section called Theatre Board, and they'd advertised then fringe jobs. And Monstrous Regiment advertised. I was working in an office at the time, doing something that was so boring that, you know, calculating how many people made journeys on aeroplanes between European cities, because it was quicker for me to do that cheaper for me to do that for 2 or 3 months than it was for a computer to do it, you know, for an hour or something. God, it was so boring. But and you know, I was preparing myself for the business of trying to become an actor, and Belt and Braces advertised, and so did Monstrous Regiment. And Belt and Braces, I don't think I actually saw them. It was just I just rang them up. But Monstrous Regiment, they asked me along to meet them, and they were living. They were not living. They were their offices and their rehearsal room was a squat in Camden Square, and you could. They got a project grant to do a play about the Paris Commune by Chris Bond and Claire Luckham, and they always liked Belt and Braces in 784. They always wanted to use music, so you know I played various instruments and could sing, and so you know I sang them a song, and I got the job. And so that was where university came in tremendously useful as well, because on the course at university I'd done bits of lighting, I'd done bits of this and that, we'd done a devised play, loads of things that you just sort of pick up or you could do a bit already were just incredibly useful in those circumstances.
How political were you? Were you political before you joined them, or did you become more political when you joined?
I'd say I became more political when I joined them. I mean, the sea in which we swam then was kind of political. I'd been very influenced by, my best friend at university was a gay man, so I'd been very influenced by his take on politics. And so I was ready for all that, you know.
But it was full of very strong feminist women.
Yeah.
How did you get on with them?
Fine.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it wasn't remotely kind of threatening. They weren't separatists, you know. They wanted to work with. I think the rule was there would always be more women than men in the company. And when I joined, there were just 2 actors and a temporary administrator who was a friend of all theirs. So there were 3 men and something like 6, 7 women.
So tell me about some of the people you met at that time who influenced you.
I met quite a lot of people in the Communist Party who were not of the Stalinist wing at all, but were very much Euro-communists, you know, who were incredibly interesting, you know, involved in trade unionism and in a way that I'd never experienced before, and who had an interest and an articulacy in it that was very, very stimulating, again, around the dinner table and what have you, you know. Along the theme of speaking out, the entire reason for Monstrous Regiment was to speak out, you know,
yes.
about the place of women in society, and there was that, and there were lots of discussions around what plays we should do, what kind of themes we should explore. I mean, and I was only 22, and while we were doing this play Scum, which was set in a laundry in Paris about the Paris Commune, which we sort of completely rewrote because Chris Bond and Claire Luckham weren't around to do a second draft, and it really needed. So I was involved in a bit of writing. I wrote a country and western song style for the two the kind of commune guards, whatever. And then we were having discussions with Carol Churchill about a play that she was going to write about witchcraft, Vinegar Tom. And so, you know, in the sort of researches that you did on the Paris Commune, or on witchcraft and the books you could read and stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't like now. I mean, all that is so much easier now because you can just, you know, Google it for a start. That was something I'd got used to at university. That was something, so I felt very at home there. You know, again, it was like a kind of lovely sort of alternative family touring around.
There must have been some really strong personalities.
Yeah,
So were there ever sort of difficult discussions where,
yes,
you know, you felt like you had to speak up for what you believed in, but there wasn't agreement? How did you find that, being so young at the time?
I just don't recall anything in which I passionately disagreed with them, you know, about something or other. They had disagreements, I remember that, and I might have tried to play a kind of mediating thing. I certainly took part in the discussions, you know, but there were rarely awful rows. Occasionally there were.
Have you had an experience when acting that motivated you to speak up?
Well, you know, yes, I have, but I've always found since those early days that what I felt most at home in, and what I assumed was the case in the theatre, with a director, say, you were kind of part of having a conversation. You were working out how you were going to do the thing, you know. There was one director who was potentially, it would be invidious to say the name of Pam Brighton. Oh, damn, I've said it. Who I think was a bit of a bully. But actually, you know, two of the women just had a word with her. She wanted, you know, she sort of wanted to bully me and stuff.
Oh, so she was bullying you?
Yes.
So did they speak up for you?
Yes, they did. I don't think it was that public, you know. I think they took her aside. Yeah. But that was the only time. Generally, it was a sort of a messy process of give and take and discussion and passionate discussion and sometimes arguments in which everyone was kind of equal. And
as an actor, one has to obviously earn a living, but how much have you managed to choose the roles that you feel says something important?
I don't know about that. I think it's the roles that kind of speak to you, that make you want to find out what it's like to try and do them, you know. I mean, after Monstrous Regiment, I did a couple of years in regional theatres, Contact Theatre in Manchester, Glasgow Sits, Birmingham. But then I got into the RSC, and, you know, it's kind of 10 years went by.
Yeah.
And in the RSC, which initially, having discovered the Old Vic when I was a teenager when the National Theatre were there and you could get in so cheaply, you know, sit on a padded bench for 15 pence, price of a tube fare and all that, see Laurence Olivier for 15 pence. You know, that's what really finally got me, I would say. I wanted to be somewhere like that, you know, and ended up at the RSC. And that was hugely involving and engaging, and after we did that season there in 81, after that they did a small-scale tour, so-called small-scale, 2 huge Pantechnicon trucks. But that was completely wonderful and hugely engaging and involving to me. We did, although, you know, we weren't doing radical plays, Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet, and I was playing Mercutio and doubling over on Theseus in the Dream. So they were fantastic roles. But the wonderful thing about that for me, which I still remember, and occasionally people say, occasionally people who saw that tour say to me or write to me about it. Some people became actors because of it. I remember playing somewhere. We played somewhere in West Yorkshire. I can't remember where it was, but it was a community school. There was absolutely nowhere to go and have a drink or eat afterwards. So the teachers had very sweetly arranged for a kind of club to stay open for us to have soup and sandwiches and drink and stuff like that. And the whole week had gone incredibly well. I mean, fantastic responsive audiences in this school. And at the end of that week, the crew were kind of, because we travelled, why there were two Pentagon trucks is because we travelled an auditorium that could go up in a big hall. We noticed a little knot of teachers standing at the side watching us, and I went over to say goodbye, and one of them was crying. And I said, "Oh, are you all right?" And she said, "You have no idea." She said, "You have no idea how hard it was to get the money from the council and whatever and the school and get people to agree to do this week, because it was expensive, And she said, "It has been like an electric current that has gone round the entire school." Yeah, I mean, it makes me fill up now, actually. But it kind of you sort of think, well, that up to then and still now, actually, it would be exactly why public subsidy for the arts, all that, taking stuff to people's places, going through that incredible effort, because seeing them on a cinema screen, it's good, but it's a totally different thing to going in to their place and just, as this teacher said, kind of shaking the whole thing up. It was great, and I've never forgotten it, And that kind of tied in with a lot about Monstrous Regiment as well, that era of subsidy for the arts, which has all but gone.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that experience probably wouldn't happen now.
No, I mean, there are still tours, but I don't think they do that anymore. It's very difficult to get actors to do it anymore, because the whole business of where you act and how you earn a living, and all the regional theatres never have companies anymore. And everyone wants to do a Netflix series. I can understand why. I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the fact that you could see Laurence Olivier for 15p. And sit on the benches in the gallery at the Old Vic. If you hadn't had that opportunity, do you think your life would have taken a different path?
Yeah, it could well have, because all those sort of things are inspirational. A kind of, you think, yes, that's what I want to do. I went to the, I could see the actors coming out of the stage door and going into the pub, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to come out the stage door and go into the pub, And it was thrilling to me, all that.
How did Endeavour change your life?
Endeavour changed my life partly because, although I didn't want to do it for a long time initially, they very cunningly sort of agreed to just let me do it year by year. And I was getting on. I was an fairly old father by then. I'd done fine, but I never had a sense of, now I can retire, and it changed my life because it provided enough money not to have to worry about the next job. Although, of course, one does want the next job, but it just to sort of not worry.
But you're now a
Ancient.
household name. No, I'm talking about your household name and almost national treasure.
Oh God. Yes, that hasn't made much difference, really. I mean, generally speaking, people come up and they say, if anyone comes up to you in the street, generally it's to say something nice, and that can be very cheering if you're coming in on public transport and someone says, "Oh, I love this," and and people have been doing it about Churchill in Moscow recently, which was in a tiny theatre, the Orange Tree in Richmond.
I saw it, and it was wonderful.
But that's just terribly nice, and you think, well, I'm really glad,
Some feel that if you have a public platform, you have a responsibility to speak out for others. What do you think about that?
I don't really have a public platform. I'm an actor. That's what I was interested in. It's the acting that I like. I don't like publicity. I don't like doing interviews, but here I am. I don't like any of that. And although I'd say it's completely up to I don't think there's a duty to do that. I don't think, people get pissed off with actors mouthing off about stuff all the time. That doesn't mean to say that actors shouldn't mouth off about stuff. But I think I once put something on. There's a delightfully eccentric group of people who made a kind of website for me, and there was a Twitter account with it that I could use and never did. But one of the recent elections, maybe the 2019 one, I live in a very very marginal constituency, and I just put up there was something you could go to see in marginal constituencies what was the best party to go for if you didn't want the Tories to get in, which of course no sane person would have done in 2019 or ever. There, I've said something publicly. I've stood on a platform and said it publicly.
You have indeed.
And literally hundreds of people may listen to it,
yes,
or even tens.
Yeah.
But no, I did that. Say, well, you go to this website and you do that, and it can tell you what is best. And there was one comment, and it was a spiteful one, saying, "Oh, I always thought Roger Allam was one of those, I didn't know he was one of those people who told you how to vote." And of course, I wasn't telling anyone how to vote. I was saying, if you don't want to vote Tory, if you want to get your local MP out, this is where you go to find out how to do it. And it's weird. It's that I don't feel inclined just to do it. Although if anyone asks me a question, I'll, to the best of my ability, I'll answer it, even if it's an interviewer from the Telegraph,
Yes, because I did read an interview where you did speak up about the use of microphones on stage with actors now.
Yes.
Which I know you disagree with.
Little bit of a niche thing, I guess.
Yes.
Not a huge changing the world problem, but yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Yeah. And was the thick of it as much fun to do as it looked?
Oh yes, it was huge fun because it was very loose. The way of filming wasn't to do the master shot and then the two shots and then come in for the close-ups one by one. And by the time you've done it 15, 20 times, you've sort of forgotten who you are, really.
Yeah.
And it can become set, and someone comes up and says, "I know you scratched your right ear on and, not so," which can be very, very stultifying. I learned from that because in Endeavour, I generally speaking kept my hands in my pockets so that they couldn't do that. But it was great fun because they didn't bother with any of that, really. Everything was shot with two cameras on the move, so continuity and things like that were much, much looser. And then there was also a degree of improvisation because Armando might say, "Oh, that bit when you say fuck off, could you extend that a bit and see where it takes you?" And so you could mess about.
But did you feel you were involved in something that was political? Because it was political satire.
Yeah, political satire, yes, of course, yeah. I mean, everything has a political context to it,
Yes.
There's nothing that's really apolitical.
Yeah.
I mean, although you can be... It's interesting how things get turned into something else. Les Miserables was a very interesting case in point because, where are we? We were in the mid-'80s. There was suddenly a lot more homeless on the street in London. And the tickets seemed incredibly expensive. And it was, to me, and it was packed all the time. And there was a guy who more or less lived outside the theatre around the side in Shaftesbury Avenue, or was there a great deal. And, it was literally people would step over him, having just wept about the poor and dispossessed in Les Miserables. So that's very interesting because it was sort of, it was like melodrama. Jeremy Irons came to see it, and I think it was him, and bought a programme for Patti LuPone, which was of a 19th century adaptation of the of Les Miserables by some guy who ran a theatre in Holborn, who starred in it and adapted it. And it had a list of scenes. And of course, if you're doing a big melodrama, which in the 1870s was like the most popular thing to do, you want to see the money. And so the barricades, which is a thin bit in the novel, the size of, at least 2 bricks, the barricades was hugely expanded and the love interest was hugely expanded, which is exactly what the musical did. Exactly. And I think a melodrama kind of lets you off the hook politically from engaging with the seriousness of the material. It wouldn't still be running today, though, if it had engaged truly with the seriousness of the material. And there was I very much doubt. Yes. Anyway, in terms of speaking out, going back to earlier when in Monstrous Regiment, which was all about speaking out, at the RSC, there was a lot of speaking out, but it tended to be group things about South African representation at Shakespeare's birthday in Stratford, which was a wonderful way of torturing the management. And then also during the rehearsals for Les Mis, at one point, I can't remember, it said, we're going to make an album, isn't that fantastic? We're going to make a recording. And we said, oh yeah, right. And they said, and there's this equity agreement, and that's the standard agreement, and we'll do that. And so we had a meeting about it, and actually we said it's not very good, the agreement. It's not really a kind of a fair deal. So we think it should be improved. And they said, well, that's the deal. That's it. Take it or leave it. We said, all right, we won't do it, and we won't bother. And there was this look on the face of the producer, and it would be invidious again to say the name of Cameron Mackintosh, that kind of went across his face. And after a week, they came back and said, look, we really have to, make this album. It's very important for publicity. And we'd had another meeting. And of course, there were loads of people saying, no, we shan't do it. But I think one of the things I've often done in the speaking out situation in groups like that is try and find a way to mediate. And I don't think I'm misremembering that I came up with the compromise, which was that we said, okay, we'll accept your deal up to a sale of 50,000. And they said, we'll be lucky to get 50,000. We said, doesn't matter, it's all right. And as it goes up, if it goes over 100,000, it'll go up on a sliding scale. And if it goes to 100,000, they say, I'll never sell 100,000. We said, it doesn't matter, it's the principle, you see. And we'll have our deal. And really, if they wanted to make the album, there was nothing they could do, because we weren't, this is when we were still at the Barbican. So they had to accept that deal. And I thought, I felt rather proud. I wasn't by any manner of means the person who led heroically from the front, but I did come up with this rather cunning plan, I think. And that became the new deal for recordings in the West End.
Oh, brilliant. And did it go up?
Yes, it did. Oh, of course it did. It sold,
Of course it did.
Cameron's revenge, of course, was to do loads and loads and loads and loads of other albums. From different, and say to them, this is, it's a grand, take it or leave it. Oh. Otherwise we won't make it. And of course, everyone did. But it's because we were a bunch of, well, actually hardly any of us had been at the RSC, but me and Alan Armstrong had, and we were stroppy. And there were enough stroppy people there. Excellent. To say, no, I think we can do better than that.
Superb. My goodness.
So that was speaking up.
That's your legacy as well. So young actors and even old actors can be fearful of speaking out in case they're labelled troublemakers.
Yeah.
And so finally, what advice would you give to others to encourage them to use their voice?
I don't know what advice to give a young actor now, almost about anything really, because the world has changed so utterly drastically from when I went to my first professional rehearsal at a squat in Camden Square, and we could get a project grant from the Arts Council, which meant we could pay a third above the equity minimum, and between gigs between tours, it was really quite easy to sign on. Very easy, really. You just went along and told them and said, yeah, that's all right. And you said, I've got another job coming up. They said, that's fine, just tell us when that happens, rather than having to fill in telephone directories to get nothing a week. So I don't know what advice to give them, because it was just, this does make me incredibly angry that you have to end up with thousands of pounds in debt if you go to further education, and that drama schools are closing because, to me that's a wasteland, and I have no idea what to do about it. So I don't know what advice to give to young actors except try. And loads of them are. The trouble is they have to work for free, There's no money. There's no, in that sense, there's no encouragement. Dreadful.
On that note, Roger.
I'm so sorry to end so negatively.
No, thank you for your honesty, because that is where we're at, isn't it? So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Courage to Speak, presented by me, Leonie Mellinger. The Courage to Speak is produced by Anushka Warden, with sound production by Theo Bosenket and music by Guy Pearson. For more information on The Courage to Speak, visit www.mellinger.co.uk.